Hallo iedereen, welkom bij Dutch&Go. Today I want to talk to you about dialects in Belgium versus dialects in the Netherlands. I just generally want to give an overview of what it's like, the relationship of local people with their dialects. And yeah, this is just a general introduction of a series where I'll be talking about dialects across Belgium and the Netherlands. Let's go. So, first of all, before we get into it, I need to contextualize certain things, explain certain things. So, first of all, what is a dialect? What am I talking about? So, generally speaking, a dialect is a variation of the language, basically, where people have different vocabulary for certain concepts, different verb conjugations, grammar, sentence structures, of course, accents, pronunciation differences, vowel changes, consonantal changes, that kind of thing. Dialects are often very locally spoken in local villages, cities, provinces, etc. So that is roughly what I'm talking about, when I'm talking about dialects. Accents, however, on the other hand, are just a lot more about vocalizations where you would hear sort of, differences in vowels, maybe one or two consonants, but they would be rather superficial and they would never really cause any communication problems. Imagine that someone, speaking one dialect with someone else speaking his or her own local dialect, providing that these dialects are far enough removed from each other, that would really cause some communication problems. Whereas normally when one person speaks in his or her own accent of a standardized language or whatever, with someone else in his or her own accent, that shouldn't really cause problems. That's also why, generally speaking, when someone from Flanders speaks standardized Belgian Dutch with someone from the Netherlands in standardized Netherlandic Dutch, wouldn't really cause problems. Not really. So that's why I've also made some videos about that, why, this whole distinction between these two variants doesn't really matter for you as students. I also briefly just want to remind you, so we have standardized Belgian Dutch in Flanders, spoken across Flanders, used by the news, newspapers, journals, etc., official communication by the government too. Then we have Tussentaal, which is further removed from standardized Belgian Dutch, which has its own grammatical specificities, vocabulary, that kind of thing. And then we have also dialect spoken in provinces, cities, regions, that kind of thing. Tussentaal is sort of uniform, uniformly spoken across Flanders. It's kind of this informal spoken Flemish. And dialects are more locally spoken. When something is more Tussentaal or something is a lot more dialect, yeah, that's kind of hard to determine. If you want to learn more about Tussentaal and what that is, I've made a video about that and check out the link there. And I've made lots of videos just in general about, standardized Dutch, etc. And you can just find all of that in an overview down below. And you can check that out for yourself if you haven't done so. But I would highly encourage you. It's complex, but it's really, really worth it and super, super interesting. Let's now, move to the Netherlands, where things are a lot more simple in terms of there is the standardized Netherlandic Dutch, again, used by the news, newspapers, official government communication, on television, etc., that kind of thing. Then there is informal spoken Dutch. Unlike Tussentaal, it's actually not as far removed from Netherlandic Dutch, so it's quite close to the standardized variation. And then there are, again, the dialects, which are quite strong, both in the south, Limburg, southwest, Zeeland, and then up north, Groningen. But, generally speaking, the Netherlands doesn't have the same kind of, let's say, dialectic rigidness or dialectic kind of identities as Belgium has. But again, this is generally speaking. And then I also should say that this is not a video for linguists. I'm not trying to be really, really precise here. I'm just trying to give, students of Dutch a general overview what dialects are like, what dialect culture is like in both Flanders and the Netherlands, how they compare, where they differ, that kind of thing. So, go easy on me in the comment section. And speaking about the comment section, if you have any stories or you want to share your own experiences, please do. I would love to hear from you and if what I'm saying, resonates with you. So let's now look at what all of this means for you if you move to Belgium or the Netherlands with your family. Maybe you're thinking about raising a child there, and what kind of impact all of that has. So let's look first of all at Belgium. So imagine that you move to Flanders, or already living there or whatever, and you live there for a while, and maybe you raise a kid there, have family. What does that mean? So roughly speaking, you could say that you would probably end up speaking standardized Belgian Dutch, what you've learned in school or during classes, but you might also pick up some tussentaal or even some dialect, depending on the region where you live. If it's a very local village, if it's a very small city, if it's like West Flanders or even maybe Antwerp, where dialects and dialect culture is a lot stronger. So of course, that very much depends, but I would definitely say that chances are that you're going to at least pick up some kind of either tussentaal or dialect or whatever are quite high. Also because it's so often used on television, series, soaps, television programs, everything that is around you that is kind of like informal communication at work or school, that kind of thing. So depending on the region, but chances are that you would hear either dialect or tussentaal, informal spoken Flemish, rather far removed from standardized Belgian Dutch, are quite high. So for example, I had a student and she moved to West Flanders, and even though we spoke in standardized Belgian Dutch throughout all of our classes, after having lived there for 2 years or something, she started to pick up dialect. I could hear in her accent. She was working in a hospital, so she needed it. I mean, not needed it, but it was kind of like the logical conclusion, that she would also start to pick up certain accents and words and things like that. So if you were to raise a child in Flanders, chances are that he or she would also, pick up some dialectic words, expressions, vocabulary, pronunciation, or tussentaal, generally speaking, too, are, high. Very high, almost unavoidable, unless you were to really live like in a standardized Belgian Dutch bubble, but I would argue that rarely really exists in Belgium. Compare that situation to the Netherlands, where, again, depending on where you live, but generally speaking, you would probably end up speaking an informal Dutch that isn't too far removed from the Dutch that you would learn in class. You might pick up some local accents, you might pick up some local vocabulary, you might pick up some local dialectic words, depending on how dialects, focused your region, city, place, village, whatever it is. But I would say that roughly speaking, you would not end up, speaking a lot of dialect. You would probably end up speaking an informal kind of spoken Dutch. Also because, again, on television, the situation there is rather different. I'm not saying that there aren't any dialects, but they are less. The cultural production in dialect in the Netherlands is rather on the slimmer side of things. So, you would not have the same exposure to dialect or very accent-heavy variants of informal Dutch, that kind of thing. It just wouldn't happen all that much. It's quite uniform, standardized, informal spoken Dutch across series, television programs, movies, podcasts, that kind of thing. Again, there would be maybe some like accents you could hear maybe where someone is from, but I wouldn't say that it would really have such a tremendous impact on you or your kid or your family, whatever, that kind of thing. So roughly speaking, that would be the difference between the Netherlands and Flanders, very much depending on the region, but basically those are the main differences. And I guess it's also just related to general thought attitude of the Flemish to the standardized Belgian Dutch. It's just, I've explained that also in my tussentaal video, attitudes are just a little bit more fraud. It has generally that reputation of the elites of arrogant people or rich people or whatever, or Dutchies, whereas in the Netherlands, Dutch people are just a lot more positive towards standardized Netherlandic Dutch. There isn't that kind of, difficult relationship there. Why is this important? Well, because it's also, again, related to certain myths that I think people have about the differences between Belgium and the Netherlands. And it's important to be precise, and I want you to understand how it really is and not, you know, generalize. By that I mean, imagine that, you know, you might have heard that people say, oh yeah, like, you know, Dutch from Belgium is so different from Dutch from the Netherlands, and, you know, people don't understand each other, they have communication problems. Maybe. But the thing is that those communication problems rather, only arise when people are speaking in their local dialect or local, you know, variation. And of course, you know, the local dialect from whatever West Flanders is vastly different from the informal spoken Dutch that is spoken across the Netherlands anyhow. Those two are very different and are also incomparable because they're not on the same level. Whereas if you were to compare, for example, someone speaking standardized Netherlandic Dutch to someone speaking standardized Belgian Dutch, or even a version of Tussentaal that isn't, you know, too far removed from standardized Belgian Dutch, I don't think you would have really major communication problems. There might be some you know, peculiarities or something specific or whatever that people, you know, might have, you know, to adjust to, but I don't think, you know, those differences are so substantial that they warrant, you know, all of the mythology around it. It's important to call elephants elephants and mice mice. And basically you should compare dialects from Belgium to dialects from the Netherlands, and then compare informal spoken Dutch to Tussentaal, where the level is different, and then standardized Netherlandic Dutch to standardized Belgian Dutch, which are very compatible and just have really, really minor superficial differences. And imagine, for example, for yourself too, that you are traveling through the Netherlands versus traveling through Flanders. In the Netherlands, chances are that people would just respond to you in informal spoken Dutch, close to standardized Netherlandic Dutch, whereas in Flanders, people would either respond to you in a kind of Tussentaal, or, depending on where you are, the village dialect. So I think those differences are important to note and to be aware of. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have any questions down below. There will be more videos coming about dialects in Flanders and then dialect in the Netherlands, so I'll be doing a closer look at that. And I also made a Spreektaal video where I speak about my own upbringing in Flanders and how that has impacted my relationship with dialect and standardized Belgian Dutch. So look out for that one too. And yeah, subscribe, give a like if you like. Thank you so much for watching. And as we say in West Flemish, tot de nooiste keer. Yo!